Okay, welcome to Authors of Google. It's my great pleasure today to introduce Richard Thaler, who's going to be speaking about his new book, Nudge. And Richard has, I've known him for what, 25 years. I knew him when he was a voice crying in the wilderness about the relevance of behavioral studies for economics. And now I would say he's more than a voice crying in the wilderness. He has a whole chorus singing the tune of this particular subject. So without further ado, let me give you Richard.
Thanks, Al. Well, it's very nice to be here, and I must say I'm looking forward to this opportunity because in some sense I'm going to be preaching to the converted here. But I think that the opportunities for the ideas I'm talking about are very much could be expanded by people like the people at Google. And in fact, we were talking at lunch that there are probably 20 interesting 20% projects that are going to be part of what I'm going to say here, and I'd love to hear from any of you who might be interested in working on some of them. And when I get to the things that I think are particularly relevant, I'll make a point of that. So, let me begin by going back and mentioning my co-author, Cass Sunstein. Cass is a constitutional lawyer at the University of Chicago, though he is headed in the fall to some obscure university in Cambridge. And Cass is probably the foremost constitutional lawyer of his generation, and I'm privileged to have worked with him on this book. So what are we trying to do here? We're trying to use the tools of what's come to be called behavioral economics to do two things. First of all, to help people make better decisions. And then second, that's our ambitious goal, is to improve decision making. And then we have our wildly ambitious goal, which is to develop a way of thinking that is neither left nor right, but helps create a new idea that might decrease the polarization in our society. And so that's the ambitious and the ridiculously ambitious, and I'll try to give you at least a glimpse of the ridiculously ambitious. Let me start by saying what behavioral economics is. And let me offer a definition that was provided by Herb Simon, who's an economist who was sort of a predecessor of behavioral economics. And he says that behavioral economics appears to be a pleonasm. You guys online can look the definition of that. It's like a redundant phrase. So he says, what non-behavioral economics can we contrast it with? The answer to this question is found in the specific assumptions about human behavior that are made in neoclassical economic theory. So what are those assumptions? The first is economists assume that people are infinitely smart, that they all have supercomputers between their ears, they have no memory crashes, and they have the ability to attend to everything at once. Real people have pretty slow clock speed, frequent memory crashes, and have trouble remembering their spouse's birthdays. In the book, we make the distinction between the agents in economic models that we call econs and real people who we call humans. So econs also have Gandhi-like willpower. They never submit to temptation. Humans, at least since the time of Adam and Eve, have occasionally had trouble with temptation. Well, at least men do. But it helps. Men are hurt by having women, snakes, or apples around. So humans sometimes do things that they really know aren't good for them. And that's another way in which humans differ than econs. A third way is econs are unboundedly unscrupulous. So, and here's an example. Suppose you approach an econ and you ask him what time it is. So I see Hal come in the back of the room. He's clearly an econ, almost by definition. In fact, I think his job title here is Chief Econ. So if I ask Hal what time it is, now if I ask one of you, person sitting in the front of the row, what time it is, he's going to look at his watch and he'll say it's 10 after 1. If I ask an econ, he's going to think, well, what strategic advantage could I get by giving him the wrong time? So Hal might be anxious to get home, so he'll say, well, it's 1:15, and then I'll have to speed up. So humans are nicer than econs, and that's a third way in which they differ. The fourth aspect of behavioral economics has to do with markets. And the question is, what role do markets play? And in what sense do markets drive humans to be more like econs? And in what sense do they exacerbate things? And I'm going to have more to say about that a bit later. I'm not going to talk today about one of the things that has interested me over the last few years, which is financial markets and financial anomalies. Instead, I'm merely going to show you one picture, which I claim is the single best piece of evidence against the very fundamental, most fundamental principle in economics, which is the law of one price. And so the law of one price says that the same thing can't be for sale simultaneously at two different prices. And here's my proof that that's false. Now, some economists have said to me, well, this is just price discrimination. This is an actual picture from Buenos Aires. This is discrimination against dumb Americans who not only are too stupid to realize that these two words are the same, but they're too stupid to realize that the pictures of the oranges are identical. And so that's all I'm going to say about bounded markets right now, but I will come back to that in a moment. So the idea we push in this book is a mouthful. We push an idea that we call libertarian paternalism. Now, when we started on this project, many of our friends looked at us in a worried way when we said we were going to write a book about libertarian paternalism, like, do you expect anyone other than your mothers to buy this book? The two words are extremely unpopular in our culture. Libertarians, while you can find them in my neighborhood of Chicago, at the University of Chicago, and in a few rural counties in Montana, they are otherwise unpopular, and but they're wildly popular compared to paternalists, who are the most evil people in society. And so here's an idea for a book. You take two reviled concepts, reviled contradictory concepts, and combine them. And that's what we do. And what we argue is that actually both concepts are lovable. By libertarian, we simply mean that people should have the right to choose. And so all the ideas we present in this book are choice preserving. By paternalism, we simply mean we care about the outcomes that we get. So most of us, if somebody asks us what time it is, we give them the correct answer. If I ask somebody out there which way to the cafeteria, they'll point me in the right direction. So those are paternalistic acts, and we don't think that, defined that way, that the idea is controversial. Now, how do we achieve libertarian paternalism? We do it with what we call choice architecture. Now, what is a choice architect? Anyone who designs the environment in which people make choices is a choice architect. So somebody who designs the menu at a restaurant is a choice architect. Someone who designs the way most people walk through a grocery store is a choice architect. And of course, Google is one of the kings of choice architecture. Now, here's maybe the most important point in the book, that choice architects must choose some choice architecture. Somebody designed the buildings here. You have to have a real building. It has to have doors. It has to have ways to get up and down. You can't have an abstract, neutral building. You have to have a real building. So real architecture has to make choices, and choice architects have to make choices. Consider the following example. Suppose that whoever's in charge of the cafeterias here, I guess we went to Charlie's for lunch. Suppose that the person in there runs a series of experiments and discovers that the order in which the food items are displayed influences what people eat. What use should be made of that information? Well, you might try to arrange the food in such a way as to make people healthier or happier. Or you might try to make people as fat as possible. Maybe you're a little overweight and you're tired of being jealous of those who are thin. Maybe you think that they should arrange the food at random to make a principled choice against influencing. Though, of course, that's a choice, and that choice will make it particularly difficult for people to find the food that they're looking for. Or, you could feature the items that you get the largest kickbacks from suppliers. This is only a few of the possible options one could have. And again, the point, and this is a point economists often miss, is you have to pick one of these. You have to pick something. The food has to be arranged in some way. And choice architects have to arrange information in some way. If you're going to do that, why not do it in a way that makes people better off? This is a picture of a urinal at the Amsterdam airport. And you can see there's something in there. Let me give you a blow up. So this is the image of a housefly that has been etched onto the urinal. Now, I'll give you an interesting bit of psychology. If I go up and touch this, it grosses people out. Now, then, right? I mean, if I touch the elephants, that doesn't bother anybody. But now, some economist, it turns out, some economist at the Amsterdam airport got the clever idea to etch these houseflies onto the urinals, and he claims that having done so reduced spillage by 80%. It turns out that guys, when they are doing their business, are not paying a lot of attention. And if you give them a target, they aim. And I'm sure there's some evolutionary basis for this, and maybe one of you can investigate that. But so in the language of our book, that housefly is a nudge. So a nudge is any small feature of the environment that attracts our attention and alters our behavior. And the theme of the book is to try and nudge people toward making better choices. So what are the principles of good choice architecture? In one of the chapters of the book discusses 6 features of good choice architecture. Today I only have time to discuss the first 3. And so the first one is defaults. A default is simply what happens if people do nothing. Now, normally what happens if you do nothing is nothing happens. But sometimes that's not the case. So if you leave your computer on for a while doing nothing, then typically the screensaver comes on after some period of time. Maybe after a somewhat longer period of time, the computer will go into sleep mode or lock itself. And of course, the length of time that it takes for any of those things to happen, there are default settings for those things. And for most people, those are the settings they still have on their computer. Another example is television schedules. At least pre-TiVo, it was very important what shows follow other shows. And the reason for that is that if you're watching one show, it's very easy to find yourself watching the next one. And it's easy to find yourself doing that even though the cost of switching is one thumb click. So the main lesson from that, we have just tons and tons of data about this, it's not very profound, is that inertia rules. And so whatever default you pick, if you're the choice architect, is going to have a profound effect on what choices people make. Now, one example of this is in 401k plans. One problem with the growing trend toward defined contribution retirement plans is people have to join. Now, the way it typically works is when you're first eligible to join the plan, you get a big pile of forms to fill out, and you're told, fill out these forms, and if you don't fill out these forms, you're not in. Now, what some companies have done is adopted what's called automatic enrollment, and under that system, you get those pile of forms, but you're told, if you don't fill out these forms, then we're going to enroll you at X% and in this investment. Now, again, a rational economist would say this doesn't make any difference. There are big advantages to joining the 401k plan. Filling out forms isn't very hard, so everybody will join anyway. That turns out to be very wrong. And you can greatly increase the speed with which people join the 401k plan by enrolling them automatically. And again, remember the basic point that you have to do something. God did not say anywhere that the appropriate savings rate is 0. And so why is it given from on high that the default savings rate should be 0? But the choice architect gets to pick what the default is, and 0 isn't a particularly good one. A second example of good choice architecture is to provide feedback. We know from psychology that it's very difficult to learn unless you're given good feedback. So here's an example. If you're painting a ceiling, you are almost painting it white. Almost all ceilings are painted white. And you're painting white paint on top of white paint, which doesn't give you very good feedback on what you're painting. And you can then finish the job and discover, oh, I missed a spot. which only becomes clear once the paint has dried. Some genius invented a kind of paint that goes on pink but turns white. Right? That solves the problem because you get feedback on what you're painting and you don't miss any spots. So here's a somewhat more practical or more important example. In an experiment in Southern California, they installed something called the ambient orb in some households. And what this is just a light bulb that starts glowing if you're using a lot of electricity. And the more electricity you use, the brighter it glows. And what they found is just installing that in people's homes reduced energy usage at peak periods by 40%. So they didn't change any prices. They simply made the usage more salient. And that was enough. And one of the themes in our book is if we want to get people to make better choices, the standard economics advice is get the prices right. That's correct. But the behavioral addition to that is get the prices right and more salient. So suppose on your thermostat at home, when you changed the temperature setting, it told you how much that was going to cost you per hour. Well, that would alter behavior. Finally, expect error. The first time I went to Paris, which was maybe 25 years ago, and I ventured into the subway system, you get a little card, a little ticket that's about the size of a movie ticket, and it's got a magnetic stripe on one side and some writing on the other, and you stick it in a little slot in the front, and it comes popping up on the top. And I'm looking at this and saying, well, I wonder which way I stick this in. And I'm an experimentalist, so I said, well, let me try putting it in with the magnetic stripe up. And that worked. And I noted, okay, note to self, magnetic stripe up. And for the next 25 years, duly used the metro that way. Then a couple of years ago, my wife and I were spending a few months living in Paris, and I was showing some friends around, and we were going into the metro, and I said, now, it's very important to stick this thing in this way. And my wife starts laughing at me, which happens frequently, but I said, you know, what are you laughing at this time? And she says, well, actually, it doesn't matter which way you stick this thing in. So the reason why I had used the metro system perfectly for 25 years is there was no way to screw up. Now, compare that with the parking garages in downtown Chicago, where you insert your credit card when you go in, and then it remembers your credit card. And when you leave, you get to some gate, and you have to reach out with your car window and stick the credit card into some slot. There are 4 ways that you can do it, right? Up, down, left, right. Exactly one way works. And it has to be the right credit card, too. So right, so there are lots of ways of getting this wrong, from the wrong credit card to the wrong way. And if you put it in the wrong way, it just spits it back out, and the gate doesn't go up. So you're not getting feedback, and you're not expecting error. And what often happens is you're behind some idiot, or you are that idiot. Now, these things are meant to be labor-saving devices, right? There's no human there. But if you go to the Chicago Symphony and park in the parking garage in front of it, and after the concerts, they have people that are standing next to the machines feeding the credit cards in, because otherwise it would take the patrons an hour to leave the symphony because so many people would be screwing up. So this is good design and bad design illustrated. Now, when I was working on the book, I sent Hal an email said, Hal, I'm working on this book called Nudge, and I think it's really up Google's alley. And here's a chapter. Maybe you could give me some comments. And I get an email back from Hal saying, idiot, you forgot the attachment. And he gloats, if you were using Gmail, you would have gotten a message saying, did you forget the attachment? Now, it turns out he was making that up. I think he also claimed to have invented it, but I gather this feature has been used at least in some beta versions of Gmail. That would be a good thing. I encourage you to nail that down. But here's something much more important. We have all sent angry emails and regretted it almost from the minute you pressed the send button. So here's the software we need. We need software that detects angry emails. Now, Eudora had a very bad version of this, but it just detected 4-letter words, and you can have perfectly polite emails with 4-letter words and really vile emails with all nice words. So we need somebody, a real genius, that can write this code. But just think how the world would be a better place. So here's the way I imagine this working. You get a message that says, you are about to send what looks like an uncivil email. It will be sent to Purgatory. And Purgatory is a file that's buried somewhere in your hard drive. And the default options is that this email will stay in Purgatory forever. If you want to send the email, you're going to first have to find the Purgatory folder. And then, and I suppose Google will have a way to find that, but you can disable that. So, and then maybe in order to send it, you'd have to, you guys work out the details on this. Maybe you have to solve some puzzle in order to send the email. The point is it will be easier to just write a civil version of the email than to press the send button, and I think the world would be a better place with that. Now, here's something that we actually did. So a colleague and I invented something we call Save More Tomorrow. And again, this is in the domain of 401k plans. And the way it works is that we invite people to join a plan in which they can commit themselves to saving more later, and in particular whenever they get a raise. So we know from behavioral research two things. One is we have more self-control in the future. Many of us are planning diets next month. Well, that's actually quite soon. So maybe July. And we also know people are what we call loss averse. So they don't like to see their pay cut. So what we say is you can save more when you get a raise, so that's just a part of the raise. And so they never see their pay go down, and since they don't really understand about inflation, the whole thing works. Now, in the first companies where we've adopted this, we've tripled saving rates. And again, notice this is libertarian paternalism. No one is forced to join, but people are better off. The people all report being quite happy with the new saving rates. Now, here's the idea that I think I need your help on. And I think it's the biggest new idea in the book. It's what we call recap. And the idea is that in many different domains, the government would require a new kind of disclosure, and it would be electronic disclosure. And let me explain how it would work with credit cards. But we imagine this for mortgages, cell phone plans, and I'll describe how it would work in Medicare Part D in a minute. But credit cards is easy to understand, and it turns out is very important because the government, the Fed, is now proposed a new set of regulations for credit cards, and I think we could easily convince them to augment those regulations with what I'm about to describe. So the way this would work is your credit card company, or companies, if you have more than one credit card, would be required once a year to send you 2 electronic files. The first would be a spreadsheet that has all the ways the credit card company can charge you for things. So if you go to Mexico and charge something in pesos and they charge you 3% to convert the pesos into dollars, that's in there. If you pay your bill late and they charge you a penalty and increase your interest rate, that's in there. If they only give you 7 days to pay your bill, that's in there. Everything, anything is in there, in a spreadsheet. The second spreadsheet lists all the things you did in the last year that incurred charges. Now, it's not that we think anybody would ever look at those spreadsheets. What we think is they would upload those to websites created by people like Google that would translate and make those spreadsheets usable. So the way we would imagine this working is you go to creditcardanalysis.com and it will say, well, did you realize you spent $930 with this credit card last year? And here's a breakdown. And by the way, if you're planning to use the credit card next year the same way as you did this year, here are 3 other credit cards, and this is how much they would charge you. The same would be true for mortgages, not so much for the usage, but the idea of plain English disclosure is an obsolete concept. It's just nobody that I know, and you know, and I have a joint appointment in the finance department at the University of Chicago Business School. I don't know a single colleague who really thinks they understand the terms of their home mortgage. So if a PhD in finance doesn't think they understand it, who does? But again, electronic disclosure would make that easy. All the terms of that mortgage would be on a file. You'd go to mortgagehelper@google.com and it would explain how this mortgage works. Yes, your payments would be $900 a month the first year, but they'll be $1,500 a month next year, and that's if interest rates don't change. And by the way, there's a $7,000 prepayment penalty and a balloon payment 6 years later, and blah, 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 blah. Now, I need help with this. Please email me. What we need to get the government to do this is demonstrations of how it would work. So that's what I'm hoping some of you can help me with. Let me tell you another place where Google could help change the world in a better way. My nomination for worst bit of choice architecture, actually thought up by somebody, is the Medicare prescription drug program that was introduced a few years ago. It was designed using what in the book we refer to as the economist's mantra, which is just maximize choices. And the idea is if you give people enough choices, then let the market do its wonders. So that's the way this plan works. People have to choose an insurance plan. There are about 50 different plans. They vary from one state to another. And they offer a website that provides so-called help. While I was writing the chapter on this in our book, I was sort of like Madame Curie, and I decided to experiment on myself. I got a friend of mine to give me a list of all the drugs her mother takes. And this friend of mine is an economist, and she had spent 2 days deciding which plan her mother should adopt. And she said, go try it. So I go to the website with this list of drugs, and I start typing in the drugs. So that's the first thing you have to do, is type in all these drugs. There's no spelling checker. Now, drug names are like strings of random letters. And it's not possible for any human to type one of those drug names, or 10 of them. And if you type Xanax with a Z instead of an X, you don't get a Google type, did you mean? You get a, huh? You have to get the dosages right. You have to get a lot of things right. And then even if you get all of that stuff right, it's just a nightmare. After 2 hours, I was calling my friend begging for help and alcohol. And anybody in this room in an hour could improve that website by 1,000%. Now, defaults, as you know, are very important. There is no default option for most people. This was an opt-in system, and you had to pick one. But there's a subset of participants that used to be in the Medicaid plan, which is for poor people. They were forced to switch over to Medicare, and they only get to pick from about 6 or 7 of the bare bones plans. And since they were forced to switch, the government had to pick a default for them, right? Because if you require them to switch, what happens if they don't pick one? You have to pick one for them. So how do you think they did that? They picked one at random. I'm not making this up. Now, some people have told me that George Bush did this just to make me happy and to give me something to write about. I haven't noticed that he based most of his other policies on that. So I don't think that was actually what he had in mind. But that's what they did. Now, just think how much easier, how much better a job we could do than picking one at random. So Maine designed a plan they call intelligent assignment. And it turns out to be very easy to predict what drugs someone's going to take next year, especially if they're old. And that is the drugs they took this year. So most of you are young. Here's a fact of nature. As you get old, you take more drugs. And they're not the fun kind. And do they provide free recreational drugs at Google too? Coffee, oh yeah, okay. Basically the rule of thumb is every couple of years you get another prescription that you have to take for the rest of your life. And so it's very easy to predict what drugs some 80-year-old is going to take next year. It's the same as they took last year. And so the analysis of picking which plan would be cheapest for a participant is pretty easy. Maine decided to do that and matched people up. And other states wanted to try this, and the Bush administration stopped them. I don't know why. And in Florida, they wanted to try this, and one of the drug companies sued to prevent them from doing it. Now, if there are any economists in the room, you can try and figure out why they would do that. Well, what's a good strategy in a market where people are assigned at random to suppliers? It's a good idea to devise a bad plan, bad for consumers, that is, high prices, and then just take your 1/n market share. So a company that had figured this out sued to prevent them from intelligent assignment because they preferred random assignment. We suspect if they had called it intelligent design, maybe it would have gone further. But now, I'm a University of Chicago economist, so I have to answer the question, what about markets? Won't markets solve these problems? And the answer is not necessarily. And it's very important to distinguish between two kinds of market phenomena. One we can call catering, and the other we could call teaching. And by catering, what I mean is if there's some irrational demand for something, firms can supply that. By teaching is firms could instead try to teach you not to buy that thing. Consider the example of flight insurance. Most of you are too young to remember such a thing, but old guys like Hal can tell you about this. So, you know, back in the 20s, when you would take a plane, you'd get to the airport and there was a booth where they were selling a life insurance policy that was good for one flight. And people bought this. Now, it was always stupid to buy flight insurance, just like it's stupid to buy the collision damage waiver when you rent a car. It's just bad economics. Planes would have to be crashing, about one out of every 100 flights would have to crash for this flight insurance to have been a good purchase. But people bought it because they were afraid of flying. So now, how are markets going to solve this? Well, you could imagine that competition will drive the price down to the actuarial price, but that's not going to happen because it's costly to sell this insurance. You have to have a booth, you have to rent the booth, you have to pay a guy, and the guy has to convince people that this is a good thing. They fill out forms. That's expensive. There was no reason to think that the guy selling that flight insurance was making high profits. Now, what about teaching? Well, somebody could set up a booth across the hall selling the advice not to buy flight insurance. But no one would buy that advice. I mean, why should I pay $10 to this guy to tell me not to buy flight insurance when for $10 I could get the flight insurance? So, and it's probably more expensive to teach the guy not to buy flight insurance than it is to sell him the flight insurance. So the same is true for mortgages. The subprime crisis was driven in part by sleazy mortgage brokers who were selling mortgages door to door. And how does competition work in a market like that? It's often a battle for who can be sleazier. And the reason is the person who's most deceptive in the way he describes the mortgage is going to get the most business. There's no repeat business in that game. This is a hit and run game. And so we can't just say, okay, markets are going to take care of this. The answer is not necessarily. Now, what about objections? I'm often reminded, as if I needed reminding, that people who work for the government are boundedly rational too. So let me stipulate that I understand that, and that politicians, let's say even at the highest level of government, are not necessarily the brightest bulbs in the universe. So I understand that. And it's not like we're proposing that John McCain or Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton start making decisions for all of us. We don't think that they should do that. But we think that they should make it easier for us to make good decisions, just like Maine did. So it's not that the governor of Maine thought he knew what was a good insurance policy for people, but he could hire some programmers and some doctors and a few other experts and devise a plan that would be better than defaulting people into a plan at random. And that's what we think people ought to do. The second argument we hear is one about slippery slopes. And the argument is, well, first you're going to automatically enroll people into the 401k plan. The next thing, you know, we'll have prohibition. And I would say that the people who make these argument. My advice, this is actually a non-libertarian thing to say, but I would actually prefer a ban on slippery slope arguments. I think that I've never heard a convincing one, and in part because there's never any empirical evidence of slopes being slippery. And that's what we would need. The world has not got WD-40 spread all over it. You know, we've had automatic enrollment for 10 years now. I haven't seen any movement toward prohibition and or any other bit of evilness. So let's take things one step at a time. And if there's a slippery slope, let's pour some sand on it. So let me conclude. Humans are imperfect. We need all the help we can get. I need all the help I can get, so this is another plea for you guys to get interested in this stuff. It's possible to improve choices without restricting options. We can do that with choice architecture. We don't need to use bans and mandates. We can just nudge. So we have 10 minutes for questions, complaints, and comments. I think there's a mic, and we have a chief economist who's prepared to hand it to you.
So I find that people who are sort of market fundamentalists and politically conservative about markets seem to understand the least about these basic ideas, and I'm just wondering why do you think that disconnect is? Like, there's so many conditions for a market to work properly, complete information and no externalities and low barriers to entry and those sorts of things. Why do you think that there is a political disconnect between people who advocate for markets and policies that actually promote well-functioning markets?
Well, I don't know whether I completely buy into your premise, but I mean, I certainly am sympathetic with it. I think it is the case that I think there's an evolutionary thing that that people who have become economists tend to be not very good at dealing with people, and we're social misfits basically. And so it's understandable that they didn't understand how people work. And so this is a good theory for why economists have not always been behavioral economists. But the point you're making is somewhat different. I think it is the case that economists understand about things like incomplete information and externalities. I think what's true is that when people have political agendas, they push those agendas. And so there are people, some of our critics, are deathly afraid of the government and think that anything the government touches will be done ineptly and corruptly. And now, maybe that's true. I think it's a bit cynical, but the last 7 years has sort of reinforced that conception. But I don't think what they are forgetting is what I claimed was my most important point, which is you have to do something. So it's in the book. It's not like we have a position on whether there should or should not have been a Medicare prescription drug program. But if you're going to have such a program, then let's do it right, not wrong. That's our view.
Hi, I was just wondering how your idea...
Where are you?
Here. I was just wondering how your ideas relate to the job market. I know that from my own personal experience, I feel like there's a lot of disinformation out there or inaccurate information about actually the work that I do here at Google and what's involved with that. And what are your thoughts with these ideas of incomplete information or incomplete knowledge in the job market?
Well, that's a great question, and it's one I don't have a pat answer to. What I would say is that, the main theme of the book is transparency and making information easier and easier to use, and that clearly could apply to the job market. Something I'm always telling students is that they need to choose careers not based on how much they enjoyed studying some subject, but how much they think they will enjoy doing some task. And they're usually not very closely related. And it would be interesting to think about how you could, so I'm just thinking off the top of my head here. It would be interesting for people to be able to get information about how people actually spend their day. What percentage of the time are they in meetings? What percentage of the time are they staring at a keyboard? And that would probably be very useful.
A question regarding price signals and consumer behavior. There's been recent news stories about gas prices affecting people's decision to go on vacation this summer. Although looking at the actual full cost of a vacation, it's unclear how much the incremental gas price would play as a percentage of the total cost. To what extent do you think this is a rational or a non-rational or behavioral type of activity? And what's going on, do you think, in terms of the psyche of vacationers that are deciding not to go based on gas price levels?
So I think it's probably mostly overreaction. And gas prices are among the most salient prices that we see. So when I gave the example of the thermostat that told you what you were using, that's what we have. And when the cost of filling up the tank has gone from 25 to 35 to 75 in the course of a couple of years, that's become very salient. And I think if people did the math, what they would find is that they'd have to do a lot of driving before the change in the price of gas would really fundamentally, if you were planning to drive from here to New York and back, then the cost has gone up. But for anything else, it's going to be swamped by food and hotels and what have you. When we had the last gas crisis in the 70s, there was sort of what looked to me at the time to be an overreaction of people towards small cars that then disappeared as they discovered those small cars were small. And I suspect we'll see some of that, but the price change here has been a bit more dramatic than that time. And I think we'll get some changes, but it'll take people a while to figure out what this all means. Yeah.
So one type of organization that has been good at using nudges for a long, long time are religions. I was wondering if you could comment on how your book sort of analyzes the way religions have manipulated people over the years.
Wow. I've never been to a place before that has asked me so many questions that I completely never thought about. So here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the trick that my students use on me all the time, which is if you have no idea what the answer is to a question, you answer a different question. So we have a chapter in the book that's related to religion. It's called Privatizing Marriage. And here's our solution to the question of what to do with gay marriage. And the solution is to get the government out of the marriage business. And so in our world, marriages would be purely private affairs that would be done by religions or scuba clubs or Google, I think Google could marry people. And the government, everywhere the word marriage appears in any legal document, it would be replaced by civil union. Now, I think in one fell swoop, this solves all of the problem, because the religious who claim that gay marriage infringes on their rights are completely protected in this regime. Religions would be entitled to have any rules they wanted. If a religion wanted to say we don't do gay marriage, that would be up to them. Nobody could tell a religious body what rules. If you want to have a religion that only allows gay marriage, that's fine. We don't take a stand on whether you can marry a goat, but you know, our inclination is to say yes, but you know, the lawyer isn't here, so I'm not sure. But I think that's a case where, let me just stop there before I get in trouble. We have one more question. Yeah.
Or actually, my question's not that good. Or did you have a question or something?
I'm not sure if mine's any better.
Well, because if you're talking about privatizing marriage, then what about like the YFZ ranch crazy thing that was going on in Texas with like people marrying like underage, like massively underage girls?
Yeah, I agree. That's not a very good question.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good note on which to stop the event. Thank you very much for coming, Richard.
Thank you. And last plea, I really want help on this recap project. And if any of you have ways of thinking about how we can make this work, send me an email.